EU agenda draws on the full toolbox of EU instruments, and it proposes to join forces in fighting climate change and speeding up the twin green and digital transition. A seminar with European Commission services on how business can access and take advantage of some of these financial instruments seem perhaps an interesting topic for a follow-up webinar, but that is something for later. Today, our focus is on our own diplomatic network and its economic diplomacy in support of trade and investment between our regions. So I will stop my general remarks here and leave the floor to our ambassadors that are tirelessly working in the front line to give our economic relations with the MENA region a new boost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rigabat, for this kind words.
You can speak. You can speak. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words and for your continual support to our Chamber of Commerce. Now, as you just mentioned, when we regard figures regarding the Belgian export to all the world, they decreased by about 15%. But if we regard to this figures, export for Arab countries, they decreased only by 5%. That's mean Arab countries, they're still a good partner for Belgium, Luxembourg, and for Europe, as you just mentioned. Thank you very much for your introduction words and your warm words to our Chamber of Commerce. And now I give the floor to Mr. Nabil Shishakli. Please, Nabil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank our Excellence for being present to this Arab-Belgian diplomatic business workshop, despite their heavy agenda and also the special time of this COVID-19 crisis. I would like also to congratulate Mr. Kaiser Ijazin and his team, Sonia and Arnaud, for organizing this event, which is now a tradition and a highly appreciated moment of the year for the business community, for the diplomatic world, and also for the Arabian embassy present in Brussels. This year it's a special setup. These diplomatic days are spread into 2 days. And before giving the floor to the prestigious panel we have today, I would like to say a few words regarding the economic outlook for the MENA region, meaning the Middle East and North Africa. The outlook is improving and better than in other parts of the world. As you all know, in 2020, due to the pandemic, the entire world have seen a deep decrease of the world GDP. Of course, it's different from region to region. And the most affected region was Latin America, followed by Europe. Latin America has known a decrease of a GDP of about 7%, Europe close to 7%, followed by other advanced economy. Regarding the MENA region, the decrease of the GDP was lower, limited to 2.9%, but the perspective for 2021 for the entire region is close to 4%, which means a netto increase of GDP over 2 years. Of course, the most affected country, as Mr. Eugebart said, are countries affected in region depending on tourism, on hospitality, on transport, and of course, on commodity price. But for the year to come, things are improving. And I think that in particular, the MENA region will benefit from a sharp rebound of the global trade. We've seen that already now an increase of the commodity price. We have seen also a relatively resilient remittance. And last but not least, the global trade, the vaccine campaign will have a nice influence on the Mediterranean countries. So let's start with the first part of this workshop, of this business diplomatic workshop with the Mediterranean region. I have a very nice panel. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to to moderate the panel, Mr. François Cornelius, Ambassador to Egypt and Sudan. We have also today Mr. Alain Leroy, Ambassador to Algeria. His Excellence Marc Tretenso, Ambassador to Morocco and Mauritania. Mr. Hubert Cormans, Ambassador to Lebanon, and His Excellence Mr. Christophe de Bassompierre, Ambassador to Tunisia and Libya. During this session, we will raise 3 to 4 questions. The first question will be the same for each member of the panel. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on all countries' trade activity, and Belgium was not an exception. This crisis initiated new dynamics of trade relations with the orientation of trade in favor of new partners. Given the strategic importance of countries located in the heart of the Mediterranean Seas as a kind of gateway between Europe and Africa, how could the cooperation between Belgium and the country where you are accredited further be reinforced? What is your outlook and guidance on this matter? And I give first the floor to His Excellence François Cornelius, Ambassador to Egypt and Sudan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Jacquely. Thank you, Mr. Ejazin, Mrs. Taverny. Hello to all the colleagues. Three points from my part in this case, specifically for Egypt. One is that COVID is hurting the population strongly, much more strongly than the official figures would tend to say. Yet the population has proved very resilient, first because it's young, and second because it has a kind of a more relaxed approach. One may say fatalistic, but I would say relaxed or in this case. In my team in Cairo, on a total of 30 local and expatriates together, I had 6 cases, which gives 6 cases among the personnel, which gives you a little bit the proportion. The government has taken some measures, closed schools, reduced team in administration, reduced attendance in restaurants, implemented rather loosely. The good thing is that the policy and its implementation are widely accepted in the population, and the health system didn't collapse. So basically the things are serious, but under control in Egypt, and the policy followed by the government is grosso modo sustained by the population. Second element, it could have been a disaster with a 4-pronged shock: less remittances, less tourism, less trade, and less traffic through the Suez Canal. Actually, this did not happen. Remittances did not go down. It even got up at some point. Of course, tourism, yes, there was less tourism. There were some measures taken, but basically the health of the tourist groups that was good, are no, much less good. They have eaten their cash flow, but they can still hold a few months. And Suez Canal, well, it decreased only marginally. I think the explanation for the good standing of the Egyptian economy is that it's moving counter-cyclical. They did an enormous train of reforms in 2016, and they're reaping the benefits out of it, not only in efficiency of the economy, but also with flood of monies from international institutions. Egypt is kind of awash with money for the moment, and they have invested it in massive public works campaign. So Egypt is absolutely full of projects of modernization of ports and roads, so perfect. Second element, it's a very informal economy. So the informal economy has kept very resilient. So I would say before COVID equals after COVID, not much change in Egypt, and we are on a positive trend. Thank you, Mr. Jacquely. Over for now.
You're welcome, Your Excellency. Thanks a lot. I can confirm for Egypt the forecast of growth. It is one of the only country who didn't have the decrease of the GDP, and the forecast for 2021 are of 3%. I give now the floor to our second speaker this afternoon, His Excellency Mr. Leroy, Ambassador to Algeria.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the ABLCC, and the director at the Foreign Affairs, the MENA region, Peter Hagebert and his team, for organizing this webinar, and also thank the audience, of course, for joining us today in such a great number. I've been posted in Algiers for 6 months only. This being said, I'm sure that every participant to this webinar knows that Algeria's economy is almost exclusively based on hydrocarbons, which represent 95% or so of the country's exports, 60% of its budget revenues, and almost 20% of its GDP. Actually, already in 2019, so before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Algeria's economic growth rate decelerated for the 5th consecutive year in a context of social mobilization. And mobilization is still there with, as you know, the Pacific marches of the Hirak, and also a context of political transition with the installation of a new president. And this political transition is somehow still going on, since there will be important legislative elections next June. The decline of the hydrocarbon industry continued. The oil and gas revenues dropped by over 30% in 2020, but the fall in exports was largely compensated by a managed decrease in goods imports, mostly in order to preserve the country's foreign exchange reserves, which are estimated around $42 billion. And it was His Excellency, the Algerian president himself, who gave this figure during a TV statement in February. Economic losses among public companies have been substantial, particularly, and this is no surprise, the energy and transport sectors. The private businesses also saw their activities severely impacted by the pandemic. And the sectors most affected were, besides energy and transport, tourism, restaurant and hotels, and retail and wholesale trade businesses. So I would not say that the pandemic induced a reorientation of Algeria's trade to new partners. Belgium has been among the top 15 for the past years as a client and as a supplier. This was also the case in 2020. And if you have a look at the statistics of the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency, you can see that Belgian exports cover a very wide range of products. Algeria's trade partners remain more or less the same over the years. The major ones, as far as the EU member states are concerned, are France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. And not surprisingly, China has been the #1 trade partner since 2013, but mostly as a supplier, not as a client. Algeria has been talking about diversifying its economy for years. With a serious decrease of the foreign exchange reserves, the country is now somehow at the foot of the wall. But there is a real awareness that diversifying has become a must for the country. At the same time, the country wants to keep on reducing its imports to what is really necessary. This was an important message from the president himself. It wants to boost its national industrial production and become a major player as an exporter on the African continent. well, it is very ambitious. And the question is whether it is realistic. I would leave the question open for the time being. Algeria introduced a series of legislative and tax measures aimed at improving the investment climate, which is good, of course. I think Algeria also needs to keep on working on building confidence. My colleagues and I often hear from economic actors that there is a lack of predictability of the legal framework. In other words, there are laws, but the implementing regulations are not put in place quickly enough. This creates legal uncertainty. But I think the government is fully aware of the legal certainty requirement and works hard to remedy this situation. I also need to mention that the trade dispute settlement procedure, which the European Commission activated in June 2020 under the Article 100 of the Association Agreement. According to the feedback I have received after months of persistent consultations, Algeria is showing signs of a genuine commitment, especially following the initiation of the arbitration procedure in March. Algeria engages more towards finding a mutually acceptable solution, and the country is making positive openings in relation to custom duties and the so-called DAPS, Droit Additionnel Provisoire de Sauvegarde, which is a mechanism of import taxes on a little less than 1,000 tariff lines. I will immediately add that according to the figures of our Belgian Federal Public Service economy, Belgian exports have not been negatively impacted by the debts. To conclude, I would say that when I recently met with His Excellency the President of Algeria, handing over my letters of credentials in March, he said to me, "You Belgians are too modest." I think he's right. And it is true that Belgian expertise is recognized and very much appreciated in Algeria at all levels, and not only in the business world. So I think we should seize the opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellence. And indeed, we are sometimes too modest, but it is also a way to be smoothly introduced in some country. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Marc Tranteau, who is Ambassador to Morocco and Mauritania.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jacquet. Thank you, so, Mr. Chairman, for organizing this very interesting event with the colleagues. It's a very broad question, of course, the impact of the COVID crisis on the national economies of the region. Now, speaking about Morocco, I would say first that the authorities have reacted swiftly and very sternly to the risk of the COVID contamination. So early in March 2020, we had the country closed its border and organized the repatriation of all foreigners which were not permanent resident in Morocco, which was a huge endeavor for this embassy. But I must say we could always count on the very nice support of our Moroccan colleagues and of the Moroccan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which helped enormously. Now, regarding the policies followed by the Moroccan government, they implemented during the first 3 months a very strict lockdown, which was imposed to everybody in the country, and with large successes. Then, unfortunately, there was the end of the Ramadan, the Eid, and there was some relaxation in the measures taken, and the epidemic
I'm afraid we are facing a technical problem. We have lost His Excellency, Mr. Trantoso.
Nabil, we can continue. We come back later.
Yes, I think it's better to go ahead and we will come back on the situation in Morocco. His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Hubert Korman, could you say a few words about Lebanon and also how you see the situation?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Right. Thank you for organizing this webinar, and very happy to see that so many people are interested. COVID-19 is at the moment not the most important crisis in Lebanon. For 18 months now, Lebanon has been in the grip of compounded crises, in particular an economic and financial crisis, followed by the COVID-19, and lastly, the devastating explosion in the port of Beirut on August the 4th. Of these three crises, the economic crisis has been by far the largest and the most persistent negative impact. Lebanon is at the moment enduring a severe, prolonged economic depression. Real GDP growth contracted by 20.3% in 2020. Inflation has reached triple digits, while the exchange rate keeps losing value. Real GDP growth is expected to contract by a further 13.2% in 2021. Add to that Lebanon is also affected by the presence of large numbers of Syrian refugees since the outbreak of the conflict in Syria in 2011. The Lebanese government estimates that 1.5 million Syrian refugees are currently living in Lebanon, that also hosts around 200,000 Palestinian refugees. According to the UNHCR, up to 89% of Syrian refugees live in extreme poverty. In general, as a result of the crisis, more than half of the Lebanese population is living in poverty. Unemployment is affecting today more than 30% of the population. Lebanese economy has staggered for years. Growth in GDP declined from an average of 8 to 9% in the late 2000s to around 1% in recent years. Belgium has since long been a friend and partner of Lebanon, together with our partners in the European Union, and we will keep on giving our strong support for Lebanon and its people, for its stability, security, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence. However, this said, the country cannot start addressing the existential challenges that Lebanon faces without an effectively functioning pro-reform government that is able, willing, and empowered to carry out urgently needed essential reforms on the basis of a clear action plan that will guarantee their implementation and will work with full transparency and accountability to its people. In the short and medium term, the new government should, to start with, engage in negotiations with the International Monetary Fund. In the short term and medium term, Belgian companies can help by maintaining their faith in the country and by providing payment facilities for the Lebanese clients affected by the financial and banking situation. They can also participate in rebuilding infrastructure of the country and provide their know-how in several sectors. In December 2020, the World Bank Group, the European Union, and the United Nations launched the Reform, Recovery, and Reconstruction Framework, the 3RF as it's called, to address Lebanon's immediate and short-term needs. The 3RF outlines a costed, prioritized framework of actions needed to support the recovery and reconstruction in Lebanon. And its aim is to build back better by adopting an integrated approach focused on a people-centered recovery and preparing the ground for medium-term reconstruction. In relation to that framework, the Lebanon Financing Facility was formally established on December the 8th, 2020, in order to kickstart immediate socio-economic recovery of vulnerable populations and businesses affected by the explosion. This Lebanon financing facility will provide an important means to pool grant resources and strengthen the coherence and coordination of financing in alignment with the 3RF priorities. The largest donor countries so far, among which the US, Germany, the UK, Canada, Norway, the Netherlands, France, Italy, and Switzerland, have already expressed their interest in participating. Over the medium term, Lebanon has absolutely to prioritize building better institutions as well as good governance and a better business environment alongside the physical reconstruction. However, given the current state of the banking system and the lack of sufficient foreign exchange reserves, international aid and private investment will be essential for its recovery. Without these, the recovery and reconstruction cannot be sustainable, and the social and economic situation will continue to worsen. So that's my analysis so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Korman. Thank you for this explanation. I see that our ambassador to Morocco and Mauritania, that we've lost, and sorry for that, dear colleagues, but he's back. Maybe I can give you the floor again, Your Excellency, so that you go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I will make a long story short regarding the fight against COVID, but suffice to say that it was well organized and that today 4,200,000 people have been fully vaccinated in Morocco. So the most vulnerable part of the population has been vaccinated. And the system was quite well implemented and avoided that the whole medical apparatus would be flooded with people. And it explains also why they have suspended flights to most of their partner countries for weeks or months. Now, regarding the impact of the COVID on the economy, because the country, thanks God, is diversified, there are positive and negative elements to underline. On the positive side, the industry and the transportation sectors have done quite well because, of course, the transportation of goods has never been suspended, and the country has started to reap the fruits of the development of Tanger Med, which has become a huge hub on the Western Mediterranean and Atlantic. And as everybody knows, of course, You have also Casablanca, which is a very big harbor. And then you have the new harbors in the southern part of the country, on the Sirens part, which are fast developing. And not only as fishing centers, but also as logistical hubs. Now, these efforts made by Morocco the last 20 years have paid off. On the other side, the tourism, which accounts for more than 6% of the GDP, has been terribly impacted by the COVID crisis. And by tourism, it's not only the tourism industry as such, I mean, hotels, restaurants, and so on, but also part of the informal sector, which lives on tourism. And this has a real social economic impact on the country. The agriculture has done quite well this year. Enfin, it will have a very good bumper harvest in 2021, which is in contrast with the last 2 years, which were relatively dry. This year will be excellent. And it's very important because more than 40% of the labor population still lives on agriculture or next to agricultural activities. So, and it still accounts for around 16 to 20% of the GDP. But as I said, we will have a good year this year, and it's very important for the exit strategy of the COVID crisis. Now, how did the government react to the challenge? They promptly established social support for the most impoverished people and for the less well-off parts of the population. But at the same time, they implemented a scheme of credit guarantee by the state for the companies which had to suspend activities or to maintain activities, but on a limited scale. And the state has guaranteed more than 75 billion of dirham to the companies, which is approximately 7.1, 7.2 billion euros. They have done that to support companies and to avoid a flood of failures during these years. But at the same time, with the Mohammed VI Funds for Recovery, they have launched a process of support to investment, strategic investment in the coming years. The Moroccan state will provide approximately 15 billion dirhams, and they will be able to mobilize through the European Investment Bank, through the World Bank, and through other donors. They will be able to attract, they hope, 30 billion dirhams. And this investment fund will be directed towards new activities, not only traditional activities. And by new activities, there is the path to renewable energy, which Morocco has decided to follow very closely. You know that Morocco is already providing electricity to the EU, and the idea is to develop even further solar and wind energy in the country. And this is a strategic choice which won't be put into question. Another element which is very important is the pivot towards Africa. Pivot towards Africa, it's a reality, but it's still a limited reality. We know that the Fichier de Phosphate, which is one of the biggest phosphate producers in the world, is already extremely active in Africa, and Africa is underusing that kind of products for its agriculture, so there is a huge market there. But there are also the insurance companies, the banking sector, which are already very active in West Africa, but also beyond West Africa. But the fact remains that if you look at the figures, it's still a limited part of Moroccan trade today. We know that 45% of bilateral trade happens with the EU, and the EU is to remain the major strategic partner to the Moroccan state, and it's the will of both partners to increase that relationship, which is a strategic one. If we look now back to the impact of the COVID on the economy and on the society, you have to know that we are in an electoral year. So there will be elections in September. The specific date has not yet been fixed, but it's practically certain that it will happen in September, because the new parliament will have to reconvene on the 8th of October. And these elections are important. We'll see if the support given by the authorities to the people during that crisis will pay off for the elections, or if, let's say, the relatively social unrest and difficulties which exist will be paid by the current parties in charge. Now, it's very difficult to say. We'll see how the electoral months will develop and who will be the winners of the elections. I don't expect any major changes in the strategic directions taken by the country. So it will remain a liberal economy. They are very eager to attract new investment. They are very eager to integrate their chain of values within the EU chain of values, which is very important indeed. And the one element to underline is that there is a tendency to give the national preference to small and medium-sized companies which are producing in Morocco. And this is, of course, a reaction to the loss of jobs and the risk for many small-sized companies due to the COVID issue. I don't expect to see a kind of full protectionistic policy followed by the country. It would be contrary to their tradition and their will to integrate within the EU, but that will be an element to take into account, especially for competitors with locally produced elements. I will limit myself to that. It's a general broad view. As I said, I see that the coming years as increased integration within the EU. They will maintain openness, but with some limitation, and they've opted definitively for the renewables in terms of energy because of their large capacities and potential. And of course, the pivot to Africa, which could be of important interest for some of our companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellence, and you are confirming what I've learned preparing this workshop, that Morocco was one of the champion in terms of campaign of vaccination, which will build the shape for the future. And for the IMF forecast, the forecast is around 4.5% of GDP growth this year. I give now the floor to our third speaker, His Excellency Christophe de Bassompierre, who is our ambassador to Tunisia and Libya.
Thank you very much for welcoming me here. Sorry, I have a double echo. Let me click here. Yeah. Sorry about that. So the impact of COVID here in Tunisia, I must say, as in other countries, Tunisia has had a very bad year in 2020, although perhaps somewhat less bad than had been initially feared at the beginning of the crisis. But still, it's going through a very deep crisis, and sectors have been affected differently. Indeed, as in other countries, industry and agriculture has been doing better perhaps than tourism, which has been profoundly affected, and it's a very important sector here in Tunisia. But an important point to see about Tunisia is that this crisis has only compounded pre-existing problems. Tunisia has been going through a period of very deep change since 2011. We like to call a democratic transition, but has been going through a lot of political, social, legal changes. Throughout this period, perhaps economic reforms have been left a bit to the side, and even more, I would say, social problems have often been solved by buying social peace through intervention of the state. And today, Tunisia is an economy that is characterized by a lot of duality. On the one hand, it has very dynamic sectors, very well-educated population. It has some niche sectors that are doing very well. It has benefited for a long time from a special regime of offshore status for companies that foreign companies that wanted to invest in Tunisia, and are still doing very well. And that is the origin of the presence of a great number of textile companies here, Belgian textile companies here in Tunisia. This is true also of other sectors. At the same time, there is a very heavy presence of the state in the Tunisian economy, with a lot of public companies that are not doing very well, with a huge and inflated number of civil servants, many of whom have been hired since the revolution, not always with efficiency as the main objective. And this weighs on the economy. I think everybody knows that this rigidity in some parts of the economy needs reform. This has been clearly identified by governments for several years, but the difficulties posed by the democratic transition have made it very difficult to have a very definite strategy in this regard. So the comparison with what I just heard from Mr. Tranceau, for instance, is very clear that Tunisia tends to compare itself to Morocco, and the big difference is the lack of a consistent strategy here in Tunisia in the last few years. Now, COVID has only made these problems more urgent. The government is now facing a risk of a financial crisis and is going through a difficult negotiation with the IMF for a new financing package. And so in all of this, efforts to make Tunisia more attractive for foreign investors have been patchy at best. There have been some efforts, but still the overall result over the last few years has been a reduction in foreign investment. And generally, the business climate is not always perceived as, is very unequal. Also in this duality, very characteristic of Tunisia is the duality between the coastal regions, which are mostly, some of them actually doing very well, and the interior of the country is really lagging behind. And Tunisia has had a lot of difficulty spreading its prosperity throughout the country. And so again, the COVID crisis has hit harder in some areas than in others, with as a result an increase of people attempting to migrate out of Tunisia in the last few months. So the situation is difficult, and on the other hand, there's many interesting things to do, I think, here, and interesting sectors to develop. Now, regarding new partners, also an important dimension to take into account is that Tunisia has historically been very linked economically to its neighbor Libya, and of course in the last 10 years this has been very difficult due to there's been a huge economic loss due to the conflict in Libya, which has had an enormous impact on Tunisia, with a lot of jobs lost for its citizens in Libya, a lot of export opportunities lost. So now, regarding your question whether there's new partnerships or new patterns of trades emerging, I think clearly Tunisia, EU remains the main partner, and they really can't escape it. Just as other countries in the region, they are a bit condemned to, and they can only try to reinforce their relationship with the EU, which is clearly their main source of economic exchange. So this is not changing. It might actually increase. I think it has been mentioned by Peter Huigebaert. We can develop perhaps that later in the conversation. I think there's an opportunity to seize for a country like Tunisia to benefit more from its proximity to Europe and to the desire in Europe to shorten value chains and to bring production closer to consumption, as Mr. Huigebaert said. Clearly here there's a card that Tunisia might play, and also for businesses in Belgium there is something to be considered. Also, developments in Libya make it now possible that that Libya might go through an economic renaissance in the coming months. It will have enormous needs for reconstruction after its conflict. So this might be also an opportunity for Tunisia to rebuild its relationship there, and for Belgian businesses interested in doing business in the two countries. The relationship with Africa is also another dimension often talked about here in Tunisia, same as the Africa pivot. And again, there's this tendency here to compare with Morocco. I think even more than with Morocco, this remains very theoretical here in Tunisia, except for a few exceptions. So maybe the potential is there, but we don't see it very much in reality for the moment. Although this idea is very present, and many business actors have mentioned it, so maybe there's something to develop in the future. As to Libya now itself, of course, Libya has been a dark hole for several years because of the conflict there. It is also an economy that's heavily characterized by its dependency on gas and oil, which is even more than Algeria, probably its main source of income, which actually has fueled the conflict for a while. So now Libya is a country in need of enormous reconstruction, reform, rehabilitation, but it has the means to do it. It's not a poor country at all. So everything has to be started again there in Libya, including our diplomatic presence, if I may say. I think we have lost a lot of networks, connections there. We no longer have an embassy, and so we're starting from very, very low. But clearly, this is something that needs to be watched for businesses that would be interested in the region. There will be a lot of needs, and there is a market that will develop, of course, gradually, because the political situation is still very, very uncertain. So this is not a short-term, I think, perspective, rather medium-term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. de Bassompierre. The time is running, and one of the duty of a moderator is to try to keep the timing. I had foreseen a few questions, but I will try to combine two questions in one, and I will go back to His Excellency, Mr. Cornet-Delchus. As you all know, worldwide there are big plans towards more sustainable economic development, and there are also big plans to reinforce and to go out of the crisis. My question is directed to Belgium. Your Excellency Cornet-Delchus, do you think that this shape to new collaboration opportunities with Belgian business? Could you share with us what are the key areas of cooperation we could and investment ties between Belgium and Egypt that we could develop in the framework of all these global plan to recover the economy.
So, certainly, Mr. Gijacli. As I told you, Egypt was kind of awash with liquidities because of the success of its macroeconomic reforms. And it is launching a kind of an epochal campaign to equip itself. In doing so, they have built a big sector in the public works sector, construction and public works. So they are getting very good there. And I would like to echo what several colleagues have said about Africa. In nearly every contact I have with businessmen in Egypt, they tell me about the African markets. Now that they have their excess production capacities on cement, on public works, on constructions, they can export them. They can export them to Africa at running costs, and they need friends because they don't have many friends. And so they look at Belgium with interest because they have little soft power. They have less soft power than Turkey. They don't have schools. They don't have diaspora. They don't have planes. They don't have air links. So they look desperately for friends, and kind of Belgium gets very tempting in this. That's one thing. On the business environment, maybe a word, if I may, it's remaining complicated. Access to justice is complicated. Arbitrage is available, but it's expensive, and it's usually Egyptian arbitrage. Customs are difficult, although they are being reformed for the moment, so let's hope it works. The fiscal setting is okay, I would say. Benefits can be repatriated, and there is a treaty on double taxation. So this side of things is okay. On political stability, I would say situation of human rights is not very good, but you have political stability. One must recognize you have security and stability. And I think it will last for long. I think it will last for at least 20 years because they have had their revolution and they see that the government is working, basically, is working to the common good. The level of corruption is okay. There is some, but it's not too visible. There's not much personal enrichment. So it's okay. I would say it's time to join the market, but then you have to take some local partners. Otherwise, the business environment is a bit complicated. Sectors, of course, public works, everything that has to do with building big bridges, architect bureau, engineering, dredging, all this is a good opportunity, bonanza, ports, because Egypt has a very clear strategic vision of industrializing around the Suez Canal and around the stretch that goes to Cairo to Ain Soufna, to the Suez Canal. And so there they really want to make an axis of industrialization. And they want it, they mean it, and they have the means both financially and politically. So we should take this very well into account. So yes, ports, they have still progress to do in the management, in unifying the management of ports. But yes, there's plenty of things to do. There's services support, of course. Water, of course, it goes without saying. The grand barrage, the grand dam in Ethiopia will make a scarcity of of water. So everything that has to do with desalination, of recuperation of water, is absolutely essential. Medical sector is, to my view, also a sector where there could be very good opportunities and money available. So that's one of the topics which are interesting. Energy, of course. One could read in the press interesting statements on green energy plan by a very daring and clever Belgian consortium. So that's something to be looked after, and of course tourism, with there again. A very interesting and very solid vision of the Egyptian government. So two messages, if I may, two messages short. First, you heard it, very strong and ambitious political vision for industrializing the country around the Suez Canal zone. So this is important. Second message, there is a strong presence, of course, of the state and the army, which is difficult to penetrate, even for us embassies. But you have a small but interesting private sector, industrial sector, leaning on very low production costs, of course, but labor costs, for example, a reasonably well-educated workforce, and proximity to the markets. So they have trumps, they have qualities. They know each other, they are open for contacts, and we in Belgium have a lot of family companies, and the culture of the family companies in Belgium and in Egypt is compatible. So we should mate, if I may express myself in this way. We should privilege contacts from owner's family to owner's family in order to develop contacts that promote investment. And there's good and sound money to be done there. Okay, I stop here for the moment, but I'm ready to come back at any time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Your Excellence. I retain for your interesting statement that first, there is a political stability. Secondly, strategic investment development plan. And thirdly, work with local partner and try to have nice ties between family company. It was very, very interesting. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Leroy. Again, the same question regarding the various plan to rebuild the economy in Europe, but also probably also in the Arab country. Could you tell us what potential you see for further economic cooperation between Belgium and Algeria? You already said that we had a long tradition, but do you see any potential development in this area?
Thank you very much. I will first focus on the question of sustainable economic development. I would say that Algeria is very keen to abide by its international commitments related to the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, but also in terms of climate change in general. I think that the country has actually no choice but to play the card of renewable energies, and Peter Hagebert stressed this fact earlier in his introduction. Renewable energies in Algeria currently represent a very low 3% of the energy mix. And they take it very seriously, because in June last year, besides the Ministry of Energy and Mining, a new ministry was created specifically dedicated to energy transition and renewable energies. Based on a population growth estimated at 1 million people per year, the energy demand is due to increase by 7% a year. So against this background, energy transition in Algeria is key. And lately, the president and the government have been insisting heavily on energy savings, how to consume less and better. Algeria wants to change its energy mix, produce electricity from solar energy. Of course, with the Sahara deserts, the potential is huge, but geothermal and wind energy are also considered. And I think it's the Prime Minister who said recently that the green hydrogen is due to become Algeria's natural gas as of 2030. So we have expertise in Belgium in the field of renewable energies, and I'm sure there should be opportunities of partnerships and investment. And if not solar, wind energy and green hydrogen could be the focus. Curbing energy consumption or even energy waste is also very important in Algeria. I recently met with a Belgian company manufacturing low consumption gas-fired heat pumps, and their representative confirmed the opportunities in Algeria. As far as the other areas are concerned, the areas of potential reinforcement of trade, do you still hear me? Yeah, okay. Because sometimes I have my connection falling down.
Hear you perfectly, Mr. Laurent.
Okay, thank you very much. But besides renewable energies, agriculture is important in Algeria. It represents 12% or so of the country's GDP. The same Prime Minister Jihad said earlier this month that agriculture must become the main pillar of the economy and of the economic recovery, actually. And the general recovery of the country depends on agriculture as a major engine for economic growth and cornerstone of an efficient agri-food industry. So this is one area of focus. The government also reaffirmed its determination to develop a pharmaceutical industry in the framework of its policy of diversification and with the objective of attaining health security. The Algerian market is probably one of the largest in the MENA region, and in June 2020, a new ministry specifically dedicated to the pharmaceutical industry was created. Again, given the Belgian expertise in the pharmaceutical field, there should also be opportunities for Belgian companies. One caveat, though, I will probably tackle this later about the 49 and 51 rule and the strategic activities. Another sector I see is the digital economy. Digitalization is a huge challenge. And I also see opportunities for Belgium here. Communication often occurs by paper or fax. And when I say digitalization, I think of the banking sector, but I think it's more general than that. Digitalization is a real challenge. The colleague in Egypt also mentioned tourism. Well, as you know, Algeria does not choose for mass tourism, but still they want to develop the sector, which accounts for a mere 2% of GDP. So I think in the touristic sector there are also many opportunities. Once again, very recently I met with a Belgian who is running a hotel here in Algeria, and he's really keen to develop his business in other parts of the country. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Leroy. And absolutely, it's very interesting to hear that for a country living on the old energy, let's say the fossil energy, is willing to come to a mixed with more renewable energy. And indeed, as you said, we have championed in Belgium for wind farm, offshore, onshore, or developing solar energy. I would like now to give the floor to His Excellence, Mr. Frantoso. And of course, if you can share your view about the sustainable economic development and the plan related to it, and more particular for Morocco and maybe Mauritania, what you see, what are the opportunities to boost business relation between both countries? I was indeed in the Princess mission 2 years ago. We met plenty of people, a lot of opportunities. So I give you the floor now.
Yes, thanks for reminding me of the mission. It was a great moment. I would like to rebound on what François told us about stability, because it's an important factor for businessmen. And my feeling is that when we're looking at the Maghreb, and I mean the extreme west of the Muslim world, you have to consider, of course, everybody would like to see an integrated Maghreb. That would be a huge step forward, but it is politically still extremely difficult. It will take time, it will come, but it's really toekomstmuziek, so, as our Flemish people say. But regarding Morocco and Mauritania, we go towards a situation where there will be an axis of stability in the region between these two countries. With the new president of Mauritania, the relationship with the neighboring countries has been re-established with all neighboring countries, of course, the traditional ones, Senegal, Algeria, Mali, and Morocco. But I would say that the relationship with Morocco has hugely increased the last year, and we see that there is a growing axis of stability between these two countries, which is very important because it's not only the Atlantic coast up to Senegal, and also the road from Tanger to Dakar, which is renovated and will be open to trade to the region, but it's also an anchor of stability versus Sahel countries and more inland countries. That's an important point. Regarding social stability, there is one very important decision which has been taken by the American Parliament this month. It's the approval of the new social security scheme for the country. It's a social security scheme which will cover large segments of the populations which were in the grey economy up to now. It's extremely important because it will give some bounties, I would say, to part of the populations which were outside of the social security net up to now. And this is a very strong decision, which was backed by the sovereign for more than 3 years now, and which will be implemented in the next 3 years. It will have an impact in terms of purchasing power of the population and social stability, but it will also have an impact regarding the medical sector, because one of the elements which will come in parallel with that social development is the liberalization of the medical sector. It's something which is in the tube. It will happen. Of course, there are some resistances, but the challenge of the COVID has shown that there is a need for it, and there will be a place for Belgium in that field of activity, because we have extremely efficient companies in the medical sector. Then something which really should happen is that both countries use the other one more as a logistical platform. Already there is a tendency, certainly from our harbor, to use and to have good connection with American harbors. This is something relatively traditional, but there is a real possibility for Belgium to become a logistical hub for American exporters towards Western Europe. And we are not enough on the map on that specific field in Morocco. There is a normal tendency to look towards Spain or France, which are let's say, the main traditional partners. But Belgium, with its harbors, with Liège Airport, with Zaventem, offers an extremely interesting logistical hub for American products, something which should be supported in the coming years. Then I won't make it too long. All the colleagues have spoken about new energy. You know that there is a green partnership between the EU and Morocco. It's something very important. It will have an impact also on the production of green hydrogen, which is very important for the future. And there are also the traditional hydrocarbon. And then I think there is an agreement which has been signed between Nigeria and Morocco to build an offshore pipeline from Nigeria to Morocco, to Tangier. And this pipeline will provide most of the Western African countries of the Gulf of Guinea with access to Nigerian gas up to Morocco. And so it could be a game changer, but of course, we are speaking there within 6, 7, 8 years. It's not something immediate. Now, if you look at Mauritania, you mentioned Mauritania. Mauritania has enjoyed a more consensual kind of government since the new president was elected. It already has some impact. We see it. There is a dialogue between the government and the opposition, including the representative of some of the representatives of the Afro-Mauritanians. You know, there is an issue, and there is a dialogue going on. It's important. It will offer a window of opportunity to Mauritania to let's say, modernize and adopt new legislation. And in that country, you know that Mauritania has become a large gas producer. They share a very important gas field with Senegal. New discoveries have been done recently in Mauritanian waters, and it's most probably Mauritania will reap the results of these investment by the large hydrocarbon companies in the coming years. Because the president has the intention to put that money into the development of the country and also into its agricultural capacities, Mauritania could become let's say, a center of growth in that region, as Senegal has been for many years. So thank you.
Yes, I've been told it's really a game changer. My credendo is related to it. But it's very interesting because with Egypt, we have discussed about a lot of business opportunity, but dredging, for instance. In Algeria, we discussed about a lot of possibility, including renewable energy, where we are also very strong. In Morocco, okay, I understand a lot of things, but among others, medical sector and logistic and infrastructure and other things. Let me now come back to His Excellency's Mr. Koroman. And there, Lebanon is known as being resilient. Lebanon is now in a crisis situation, you mentioned it. But what could be the role of the Belgian companies to contribute to the economic resilience and maybe help with business continuity?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Gijakali. Resilience is not a very popular word in Lebanon these days. I mean, it's well known that the Lebanese have incredible skills of coping with challenges and falling back on their feet. But there is a predominant feeling today that yes, that maybe there is being asked too much of the people given the circumstances. And in general, one can say that the current crisis has proved that the Lebanese economic and financial model is no longer sustainable, and that we need to find a new model for Lebanon. The plans are there. The plans are there. Everybody, the diagnostics are there. Everybody knows within Lebanon and in the international community and international institutions, we all know what is wrong with this model, and there are plans to face this model, to face these problems, and to look for solutions. However, the main thing that is lacking at the moment is the political will in Lebanon to address these challenges and to push forward with these essential reforms. And it's only then that we can re-establish confidence with the international community, international institutions, and the international investors, and unlock the financial assistance that will be inevitable to put this country on the right track. As far as Belgium is concerned, in general, I would say one of the big strong points of Belgium that could apply to Lebanon is, of course, the fact that we are strong in logistics supply chains. And a second thing is, and I would totally agree with my colleague in Egypt, John Cornet-Delgus, François Cornet-Delgus, that François Cornet-Delgus, that Lebanon is, as Belgium, very much based on family companies, and we should exploit that also in our business opportunities. Now, with regards to specific sectors, there are a number of priority public projects. As we know, the infrastructure sector is badly in need of rehabilitation. Following the recommendations of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, as I said, the plans are there, the ideas are there, but we're confronted to low-grade infrastructure, a dysfunctional electricity sector, water supply shortages, and inadequate solid waste and wastewater management. So in the medium term, there are opportunities for Belgian companies, not only for contractors, but also for suppliers of related products and raw materials. Energy, for example, the reform of the electricity sector is one of the most urgent reforms that Lebanon must carry out. And this would include modernization of the electricity network and the increase in production capacity. So for the moment, the construction of 3 megawatt power plants on 3 sites is planned, but we're waiting for the political will to push forward with it. Same for renewable energy. There are ambitious plans, ambitious goals. 30% of the country's electricity supply should come from renewable sources by 2030. But for the moment, renewable energy only represents 3.5 to 4% of the country's total energy mix. But we believe that there is still a will and a consensus to go ahead with the plans once the financial situation in Lebanon permits it. Then oil and gas. There is, of course, a lot of interest in Lebanon about the potential in oil and gas, particularly after the discovery of deep water gas in neighboring countries that share the same geological offshore bassin with Lebanon. And exploration has already started. And should discoveries be made, there will be a need for all types of products, equipment, and services that Belgian companies can offer. This is, however, provided that Lebanon can reach an agreement on the delimitation of its maritime borders, not only with Israel, but also with Syria and Cyprus. On the environment side, one main priority is the treatment of waste, of household and hospital waste. That is a crisis that's been going on for many years. Also here, the plans are there, but progress has been lacking due to political blockages. On the water side, there is on the one hand water resources, on the other hand there is wastewater treatment. In both areas, Belgium has a lot of expertise, and in Lebanon is full of water resources. But unfortunately, for the moment, they're poorly managed and their potential is largely untapped. There is, again, a sector strategy for the period 2010-2025 with infrastructure projects to improve the water supply, in which Belgian companies can find a lot of opportunities. Then after the blast in the Beirut port, there is of course a big need in the reconstruction of the port of Beirut. But let's not forget the other ports, those of Saida and Tripoli, which are in need also of modernization and expansion. There is, once again, a port reform strategy, and I already touched upon it, which is the reform, reconstruction, rehabilitation framework that has been put forward by the World Bank, the European Union, and the United Nations. Let's not forget also that everyone at the moment has their eyes particularly on the port of Beirut, the Russians, the Chinese, the Turks, the French, and the Germans. We will see what comes of it, but in any case, there will be opportunities for Belgian companies in that regard as well. With regard to the private sector, so sectors, we believe that, and let's remind us that Lebanon imports around 80% of the products it is consuming, and for the time being, there is a shortage of all types of products and equipments. But opportunities for Belgian firms are in raw materials for industry. And I would like to draw your attention on the CEDAR Oxygen Fund, which aims to finance Lebanese industries so that they can import raw materials on the sidelines of the scarcity of foreign exchange in the markets. This CEDAR Oxygen Fund was launched in July last year and has the Lebanese Central Bank as its sole investor. They are organizing tomorrow a virtual industrial fair, and I will put the website address on which you can register for this event tomorrow. I will put it immediately in the Q&A of our discussion. Other sectors are, of course, food products, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, the lifestyle, the fashion sector, indeed also digital economy and ICT. So that is basically.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I add to my list a lot of sectors where Belgians are also very competitive, and in particular what you mentioned about the water treatment. And I take the opportunity of your presence also to underline how for the Lebanon, being in such a difficult situation, they are still hosting a lot of Syrian refugees, which is somehow a kind of example. Let me now turn again to Christophe de Bassompierre. What do you see in terms of plan to restart the economy, maybe also in a more sustainable economic way? And in particular, for Tunisia and Libya, maybe what are the challenges looking ahead in attracting Belgian investors and increasing the trade between our two countries?
Thank you very much. Perhaps to start with Tunisia. To Tunisia, I think the main challenge right now is whether Tunisia will be able to overcome its political crisis in order. The crisis is complicated. I won't go into details now, but it really has trouble taking decisions for itself at the moment. While it is in need, and it recognizes that itself in need of an economic reform plan. So the real question is whether the government will be, the government as a whole, the institutional set of Tunisia, will be able to come up with a reform and a plan for economic recovery that will be consensual enough and supported by all forces in society, including business, the business world, workers, trade unions, political forces, and so on, to be so consensual enough to be effective. So at the moment, I would say there is a bit of uncertainty as to what kind of political, what kind of economic policy Tunisia will conduct in the coming years. But nevertheless, I think there are possibilities to do good business here. I think it's not the country to go for big infrastructure projects. The reality is that there are quite a number of big plans for big projects that are on the table, that have gotten financing. Billions of euros have been lent or have been promised, granted to Tunisia for big infrastructure projects that are not being implemented. Not for lack of financing, but for lack of, implementing capacity. So this is not the area where you need to be looking for. On the other hand, talking to Belgian companies that have been present here, have been invested in Tunisia for a long time, especially in textile sector, you hear that they have a rather positive experience here. They benefit from an offshore system that, including reduced taxes, reduced import duties, as long as everything they import is re-exported. This special status has been very successful in past decades, and it's been rather being eroded in the last few years. So the fiscal advantages are not so big as they were. Nevertheless, these businesses are generally very happy about how things are working here. They're happy about their workforce. They find that they benefit from proximity of Belgium. They benefit from also the linguistic advantages, the fact that most people here speak French, or you can work in French here. And generally, the very positive cost of labor here remains interesting, even though there has been fierce competition from Asian countries in that regard. So the position is not as favorable as it was before, but still interesting. And Tunisia, for Belgium, it's mostly textile, but Tunisia also attracts interesting companies in other relatively high tech sectors. You have here an aeronautics industry, you have here an automobile parts industry, and I'm sure there are opportunities in the industry in general to produce pretty much anything here in relatively favorable conditions. So especially now with the changing environment due to COVID and perhaps a premium on proximity, this can be really interesting to explore. I'm talking about industry, but it's not only industry, I think also in the services sector, there are many opportunities. You can find, again, human resources here, and what you're seeing is a development of the IT sector that's more and more able to produce very high quality products, working, using the opportunities of like now, working in Tunisia for companies anywhere. And there are new links being created between Belgium and Tunisia, and this can be certainly expanded. Tourism is another interesting sector. In another way, Tunisia has a history of mass tourism, very basic mass tourism, all-inclusive stay at a hotel on the beach. But it knows and it is in need of a diversification of its tourism, and it has a lot to offer. It has beautiful landscapes, it has archaeological sites, it has incredible, opportunities for ecotourism in many ways. And it's interesting to see that there is already a certain Belgian presence. Many of the very best quality guest houses here are being run by Belgians. I think we have their know-how to bring to this sector, because the idea is there, but they don't really know how to do it, or few people have really the idea of what would attract consumers looking for another style of tourism. I think here we can create partnerships to bring a better understanding of the needs of the consumers in that regard. I would certainly echo what François Cornet said about family companies. So here it's not easy to deal with the state and institutions, frankly, but the strongest partnerships that exist between Belgium and Tunisia are links between family companies that sometimes go back now 30, 40 years, very, very strong links. And I think this is something to be developed again. I mean, this is a country where family companies that find a family partner, something similar to themselves here, can really build a relationship that will last for a long time. You mentioned also, we have been mentioning sustainable energies, generally sustainable investment. I would say in this country, everything needs to be done still. I mean, you were starting from a very low. There is a certain awareness that there is a need for more sustainable transition here in Tunisia, but it's very difficult to carry out. But certainly, again, what we can bring is know-how. We have a lot of companies that have expertise in this regard, and I think this would be very welcome here in all aspects. And one interesting dimension here is the efforts of Tunisia to decentralize in the last few years, because a lot of these new investments or new tasks are being now increasingly run by municipalities, which are trying to define their new role, and also, I think, are a new market for specialists in environment-related industries. So here, this is something to be looked at. what the needs of municipalities, which are new, have been recently created, really. So they really need to build their own role, but they are in demand. They really want to get advice, knowledge, and ideas. And so I think here companies should be prepared to come not only with their products, but with advice on how to use them and how to integrate them into policy. So that's a number of things. Perhaps about Libya now. To be frank, Libya is only really has been going through an incredible turnaround in just a few months. It's gone from conflict to a completely new political situation. The big question, of course, is how durable this is, how sustainable this is. So it's still very early. But potentially, the potential is enormous. Libya is a very rich country. It has a lot of money. And there again, it has a lot of money and very little capacity to use it, capacity to define how to use it, to decide how to use it. They need a lot of, again, know-how that should be exported to Libya. And so there, I think this is a market rather for perhaps big projects, more infrastructure and so on, but also for anyone who is a bit daring and is also prepared to bring with its product this dimension of providing advice and counseling as well. You know, I'm at a loss to speak about specific potentials. You know, I haven't been to Libya. I've been to Libya only once now, but less than 24 hours. It's a place where we need to reconstruct entirely our networks, our presence. So it's a work for the coming years. So I would say something to be watched, but maybe not very short term.
Thank you for sharing your view, Mr. Ijazin. My work is very challenging between keeping the timing while all those speakers are telling us so interesting things. But we already spend more than half an hour of our time. What I would like, if you allow me, I would close now this session. And from my side, I would say a few words regarding Credendo. As you know, Credendo is the public export credit agency, and we are available, ready, willing to support Belgian company doing business in Arab country by, for instance, giving our economic and political analysis and how we see the situation in each and every country, by also providing our product from the credit insurance to the financing, direct financing or given guarantees, and also providing insurance for investment abroad. And of course, the Middle East and North Africa is one of the countries where we are very much present. Kaiser, I give you the floor. I don't know how you see the timing.
Thank you. Can I take the?
I didn't talk about Sudan.
Sorry?
I didn't talk about Sudan. Maybe I can say a small word about Sudan.
Yes, please. Sorry.
No, on Sudan, just a thing. The new barrage in Ethiopia will regulate the flow of the Nile and open plenty of land for agriculture in Sudan. So you'll have immense possibilities for cattle raising and agriculture, and of course water management. So that's it for Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, it's really my great pleasure to bring this interesting workshop to an end. Through this event, we wanted to provide you with the necessary know-how and guidance to develop stronger skill in conducting your business in Arab countries situated around the Mediterranean Sea. I would like to mention that we received some technical and specific questions, but we will not be able to answer immediately. We can assure you that we will come back to you in the coming days to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Brendes, and other questions. They are really specific and technical questions. We will not be able to answer online, so that we will come back later on. Your Excellencies, dear ambassadors, as I observed your excellent presentation and constructive approach, I can conclude that the purpose of this gathering has been completely succeed. As I was mentioning in my introduction, there are a lot of things that we can do to intensify the relation between Belgium and Arab countries as it rises out of your various analyses. We see through your presentation the potentiality that offer the Arab countries. And we can engage a large number of interests we have in common. That's mean Arab countries and Europe in general. The Arab cooperation between is based on common interest in long history, in neighborhood and geographic proximity. And on the other hand, the role played by your excellencies, the economic diplomacy is very, very important for our partners, for our members, for the Belgian companies. I would like to pay a deep respect to all of participants for your participation at this gathering. I hope that you would have learned, that you have learned through this workshop will help you a lot for your duties and bring you opportunities for stronger partnership with the region in the near future. We greatly value the trust and support of those who collaborate with us, who are members of our network, and for those who are simply our friends and our members. We would like to warmly thank the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and particularly Mr. Peter Huygevart, for the precious collaboration in setting up this event. Dear ambassadors, we are fully aware of the large number of your engagement that occupy your agenda during these challenging times, and deeply appreciate the importance you accord to our Chamber of Commerce and its member for your presence here today. Your dedication deserves our grateful thanks. I would also take this opportunity to extremely thanks and deeply thank, and that we appreciate the support of Arab diplomacy and Arab ambassadors here in Belgium to our Chamber of Commerce and to our members, and for their strong and continuous support to our Chamber of Commerce. Last but not least, I would like to thank especially Mr. Nabil Shishakli for this valuable contribution to manage this event, and allow me, before conclude, to special thanks to the staff of the Chamber for setting up this event. Thank you again, ambassadors. Thank you again for all participants, and hope to see you next week. As you know, we are organizing the same edition for your colleagues from the GCC and Jordan next Tuesday. Thank you indeed, and good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Merci, messieurs les ambassadeurs. Un grand merci.
Thank you, merci. Ma salame.
Merci, Nabil.
Salama.
Merci.
Thanks all. Ma salama.
Ma salama. Merci. Good namidah.
Salama.
À bientôt.
À bientôt. Merci. C'est parti.